afternoon, Dr. Gary. We welcome you in a live broadcast in the frameworks of online marathon, which is titled Enigma of Russian School of Fencing. And I will kindly ask you to introduce yourself to our viewers in regard to your academic pursuit in Russian Mafia.
I spent several years there doing the transport for aluminium for the Russian aluminium industry. So I traveled all over Russia, everywhere you could possibly go. And most of the people I dealt with had some connections with the Russian Mafia.
Mm-hmm.
But they were very helpful people, very useful people.
Mm-hmm. Can you please share in short about why have you decided to write that book, In the View of Russian Mafia?
Well, I wrote the book, my experiences in Russia. Well, people keep asking me what I was doing, my family, everybody. So I thought maybe I would just write down what it is I did and why I was there.
Gary, in your opinion, what is unique and specific about Russian Mafia? What makes it different than all other criminal structures worldwide?
Well, it's interesting because there is a portion of the Russian Mafia which is in fact involved in crime, prostitution, drugs, all sorts of things. But that's not really why it was important. What was important is that it helped bring about the safe transformation of Russia. When we went to Russia to start trading metals, there was no cash. Nobody had anything. So I give you an example. I had in the port of Vanina in the Far East, I had a ship coming in, and I had to pay about $110,000 for the cost. So I transferred $100,000 to the port. I got to the port, and the port says, "Look, we haven't got any money to pay the workers." I said, "But why? I transferred it to you." He said, No. This is Russia. If you transferred it to us, it went to Moscow, and then we have to petition Moscow to send it down to us, and it'll take about 2 months. I said, "That's crazy. Can you transfer money?" He says, "Yes, but I can't get cash." So I said, "Okay." So I went up to Khabarovsk, and I said, "Who's the local mafia there?" A guy called the Poodle, and I made a deal with him. We worked out a rate for dollars into rubles. I had the port transfer the money to him. I took 2 big black bags full of rubles down to the port, and we were able to work. If it wasn't for the mafia, nothing would have worked in the country. So many times when we were having to pay our bills, what we would do is not necessarily change the money. We would pay for cigarettes and vodka. And the cigarettes and vodka would be sold by the mafia on the street, and they would give us the liquidity so we can go out and do our business. The Russian system, the Soviet system, was not one which allowed for local banking, local cash. Everything was done by transfers and by notes. So the mafia played a very important role. The second reason it was important was that in many parts of Russia, there was no middle management. You go to a place and you set up a factory, you had all the factories working, you had the people who were there, but there was nobody who could actually run it. So when the various people like Yukos and the rest went out to all these different parts, they made a deal with the local mafia people to do the management functions inside the plant because they had the people there, they had the authority, and they had the cash. It was very simple. Without the mafia, Russia wouldn't be modernized.
What role does Russian Mafia play in the criminal world of Europe, and how large Russian Mafia in it, in your opinion?
Well, there are lots of mafia families. There are different groups and different families that each have a speciality. They started off small on a regional basis, and then they got much larger as they joined together. So Yesivos, Bailova, they're all there, and they had already had ties from beforehand. The mafia was operating quite well under the Soviet system. It wasn't a new and different thing. Boris the Gypsy was very important to the Yeltsin family, and they were operating well there. Now, there are they operated in the sense that the difference was that they had money. A lot of the other mafias in places like the Russian, the Georgians, or the Czechs or the Hungarians, they didn't have, but the Russians had it, because the way the Russians made their money, the way the whole thing got started was that the KGB understood that in order to make the system function, they had to have a working system. So they chose several people who they made as oligarchs, but they also did a lot of business with the Russian Mafia. And what they did is they would ship trainloads of rubles and gold out of Russia, because there was a gold ruble and a standard ruble. So they would take the gold and they'd ship it down, they would sell it to the various criminal groups all over Europe and take money back to Russia. That's how the whole system was lubricated. So now they have controls all over the place. There are people who owe them, and they have a very strong organization. But it's now gone less into the criminal side, although it's true. But the biggest business is actually inside Russia itself, running towns, villages, factories, all sorts of things.
So what would be the historical periods that we can divide stages of formation of Russian Mafia?
There are about four major stages of it. The Urka, the people who were the original criminals, were sent to the penal camps in the Gulag. And the Urka were the people who, the top guy was the Pakan, and there was the whole structure that they would operate the camps for the Gulag. So the Russian prison administration, to a large extent, relied upon the organized criminals, the Vori, who had the system, Vori Zakon, in the middle of the camp. Then the political, the Zeks, would be there working, but the mafia people would deal with them. Then the rule was that you wouldn't deal with the Chechists. But during the Great Patriotic War, Stalin needed bodies, and he needed people to fight. So he went to the prison camps and said, look, we will give you your freedom, we will give you work for us if you will leave the camps to help fight the war. So a lot of the people decided to leave the camps and fight. But the traditional Vori, they didn't like this at all. And so they were known as these the suki, the bitches.
Yeah.
And then you had, after the war, when many of these criminals came back into the camps, they were picked upon by the Zakoni, the people who were originally under the code, and you had what was known as the War of the Bitches, where they fought for and against the government. So they gradually, as people were released from some of the camps, a lot of this went more normally, so they weren't fighting because they weren't still in charge of many of the camps. But the Pakans, Predoroks, they spoke a language called Fenya. So Fenya was an argot of the camps. And if you wanted to deal with anybody, you actually had to learn Fenya. When I went out to the Russian Far East, it was important for me in my daily doings to have a knowledge of Fenya, so I could talk to a lot of the people and understand what they were saying to me.
What is the role of a blade or a knife in Russian criminal tradition in your viewpoint?
Well, the Vori are very important because they're traditionally looked up to. They had their word as law. They would do crazy things. They would shove knives in themselves, also to prove how brave they were. In Japan, they would cut off their fingers. In Russia, they would do arm. You could always tell who you were dealing with. When I first went to Russia, I learned you looked at the hands, because on the hand was the tattoos. Each tattoo had a separate meaning.
Yeah.
You had a knife for someone who killed. You had teardrops. You had stars. The whole tradition. You could read where a person was from, what he'd been, by reading his hand. But that's gone now. They don't do that anymore. Now the prisoners are merely prisoners. They're not really. The politicals aren't really there anymore.
So Gary, since you have personally met the representatives of this criminal tradition, May I ask you about the types of the knives that they use in the prison and outside?
Well, inside the prison there was a very hierarchical structure because they also had to have the permission of the camp guards and the prison operation. But outside, they went mainly for sports center. They were businessmen, but they were sportsmen as well. So a lot of the people who were working with the mafia at the lower level, they were sports people, people who were athletics. You can always tell they had the shaved head, gold hair, and a leather jacket. It wasn't hard to tell. It was like a uniform that they would wear. And for extent, the vody was still very important. When Japonchik was sent to the U.S. to solve some of the problems in the mafia in New York, he was there with the full blessing of the vody in Moscow. They had a big meeting of 12 families with the government in Russia to discuss doing this stuff. It was a symbiotic process. It wasn't people fighting against the mafia. Only later did they decide to fight against it, when they decided to become regular and became a normal thing. So a lot of the people who were running the illegal gambling and the rest were suddenly found that there was another group of people who came in after the oligarchs. These are the Siloviki. These were ex-Chekists from a variety of places in Russia, but mainly St. Petersburg mob. We used to call them the oligarchs and epaulets. They became the new leaders of the Russian business. And to that extent, the mafia were told, you stay with crime, we'll stay with the large businesses. So they worked out a way of dealing with each other.
In your opinion, what is the relation of Russian criminal tradition and such structures as NKVD?
Well, it was a symbiotic relation for a while. The KGB worked very closely because under Salayev, Kaspalatov, there was a committee within the KGB who wanted to move the money out of Russia as fast as they could when they saw that there was going to be a change in government. And before Gorbachev got rid of the Communist Party, when the change was coming, so they set up accounts in banks all over the world. This is why they had money to spare after the revolution. When Yeltsin and these people came in, they banned the Communist Party, the KGB still had it. Then, after they made this attempted coup in the South against Gorbachev, they were in great disgrace. The army was stronger, but the people who were consistent to this was not the KGB, it was the GRU. The GRU are the people who actually haven't changed any jobs since new. The KGB decided it was going to have its modernization, so Karabinov decided to have a Miss KGB contest. Mm-hmm. They went into all these sort of try to win the thing back, but the KGB was largely purged because the people just got fed up with them after the attempted on the coup against Gorbachev. So the people who actually took over the control of the operations were the GRU people.
And what would be the definition you would give to a notion such a Russian criminal tradition from a scientific point of view?
Well, it became, the definition would be, it was unorganized local crime that became organized and had our groups across Russia joined together, and all of a sudden it became a very large professional organization, one like giant companies, competitive giant companies, but giant companies. So it went from little guys running cigarette sales and selling vodka, or picking up 200 tons of aluminium from some plant, or getting sewing machines. Because there used to be a system under the block system. There was a man in Moscow called Tolkach. Tolkach was the guy who organized all the businesses for the factories scattered around Russia. They would get the budgets, etc. So when the system broke down, they needed their own Tolkachu, so they sent their own people around, and the people they sent were people who had friends over in the rest of Russia. That was mainly the mafia. So it became a parallel structure.
There's one question I would like to ask you. You have been referring to Russian mafia or Russian criminal tradition in the past tense, telling that it was or it had been. Do you think that it does not exist in today's world?
Oh, no, it exists,
Okay.
but it's far more professional. You have people in charge who have been better educated, who've worked through the management structures, they've had responsibilities, they have international collections. So it's not just the criminal side of it, it's a professional side of it that's being run like major businesses. There are semi-official crooks, Semyon Mogilevich. These are people who are official government crooks. Then you have the unofficial ones. And then you have the people like you get a small group like in Kostya Scrum, who runs the factory. But then he becomes institutionalized as well. So I would say that the organized criminality, the prostitution, the drugs, that's nickel and dime business. The big business is in metals, oil, gas. That's where all the crooks have vegetated.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gary. It was a pleasure to speak with you, and we appreciate your valuable time. And see you in the next interview about a discussion of the book On Your Knives.
Great. Good luck.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.